So I think we'll start with the just the housekeeping stuff for the webinar as people come in. Uh, don't want to delay things too much. I know we have a lot to talk about. So just thank you everybody for coming. My name's Luke Meller. I'm the marketing director for Pantonium. And with me today is Paul Buck, who's the transit manager for Belleville Transit in the city of Belleville in Ontario. And today we're going to talk about the last month and a half, essentially, of what Belleville has done to manage the COVID-19 crisis. Because they took a pretty unique approach to the emergency, and I think it's will be of interest to anybody who's interested in transit. And we'll be able to at least learn from their experience and then also discuss what's going on in the future. So just a few housekeeping items. We're going to hold a Q&A after the at the end of the webinar, essentially. And so hold your questions then, but there is a Q&A box in Zoom that if you have a question during the talk, just feel free to shoot a question in there, and we'll go through them all at the end of it. And also somebody from Pantonium is watching that, so they can maybe answer a question or two if it's a simple one, just via that chat. The agenda today is, sorry. Oh yeah, so speakers. The agenda today is we're going to talk about Belleville Transit before COVID-19. We're going to talk about their response and basically the timeline of their responses as the basically March unfolded. And we're going to talk about why and how Belleville switched to on-demand transit during the crisis, some of the operational results, because basically they've been running on-demand with Pantonium for about a month now fully. And we'll discuss a few lessons we've learned from this deployment, and then talk about the future, and then of course the questions Q&A. So with that, Paul, I have a slide with just some stats about Belleville, but maybe you could give us an introduction to Belleville Transit and maybe talk about the project that we've been working with you on since 2018, that initial on-demand service for the night bus route. Just to give some people some background before we get into what happened in March.
Absolutely. We've had the Pantonium product now for about 2 years, and we were running our late night service on demand. When we initially launched, we had 2 fixed route buses that used to run a large loop around the city of Belleville from 9 o'clock at night until 12:30 to look after our employees that were getting to and from our Northeast Industrial Park area and to get them to work. But what we were finding is that we were only carrying about 35 or 40 passengers a night, and it wasn't sustainable, and it just wasn't practical. It wasn't working efficiently. But when we launched the Pantonium on-demand product, our ridership responded immediately. We saw a 300% increase in ridership within the first month of operating the service. And we were operating same number of vehicles, same infrastructure, running about the same number of kilometers, often less, but carrying upwards of 300 or 400 passengers a night rather than the 35 or 40 that we were carrying before. In that service, we've been operating until March 19th of this year, when we decided, with the COVID-19 situation, to flip to on-demand for our full service during the pandemic.
Yeah, and so let's go into that initial stage. I think all the transit agencies that are on this call have probably went through the same kind of response and have been dealing with the same type of challenges in that March period. I think it was that second or third week of March where everything became real for everybody. And so I know Belleville went through several steps in your response. So maybe you can walk us through that kind of that timeline of how you responded to the crisis.
Yeah, our ridership, it started to dwindle about the second week of March. We started to see our ridership start to slide a little bit, but it only took until it's around the 19th of March, I guess, or just before, when our ridership just completely dropped off, and it only took about 48 hours to go from a half decent regular daily ridership to almost non-existent. And we started to take a look at how we could provide the same level of, or the same hours of service, but maybe decrease some of our costs in operating the service. So we started working with our economic development manager at the city of Belleville, and stay in regular conversations with some of our industrial park employers that we knew were going to be deemed as an essential service because they're in the food service or something similar, to find out what their hours of work was going to be and what we could anticipate for ridership, so that we weren't missing anybody. Because our sole purpose, once we decided to start decreasing our level of service, was to maintain the essential services, the essential trips, to get people to and from work, to and from our hospital here in Belleville, and to and from grocery stores when they were needed. So then we started taking a look at when these rides are going to be, and we quickly realized that our service still had to operate from 5 a.m. until at least midnight to get everybody to and from their shifts at work and to and from home. And in order to do that, then we started taking a look at what are the options? How can we do that? Because at the same time, we were also eliminating cash fare or payment on the bus so that we could maintain safe distances for our drivers. We implemented the rear door entry so that we didn't have anybody coming past the drivers, or maintain that social distance as best as we could. And we started capping off seats so that we were limiting our ridership on board. And all this had to be taken into account and consideration so we could decide the best service to operate. And so we started looking at our options. Do we run an hourly service? Can we run, how can we set this up to make the most amount of sense with what we had? And our daily ridership was down at this point to basically what we were seeing in our regular night service. We were down to almost 200 passengers in a day. And we were carrying more than that at night within in 2.5 hours of service with on demand. So it was a pretty quick decision that the best way in order to cover the full regular service hours from 5 a.m. until midnight was going to be with on demand. But then we had to take a look at where were our peaks and valleys. We started to look at when people were riding the bus, and we noticed we had two peaks. We had an AM peak starting right at 5 a.m. that ran till approximately 9:30. And then we had a second peak kick in, which is actually higher than our AM peak, around that 1 until 3 in the afternoon, the switchovers at the factories when everybody was going in and coming home at the same time. So then we started looking at how can we provide the best service, give our drivers a break so that they're not working as many hours as they have been, because they need that social distancing as well. Set up our sanitizing, kind of spread out the workload as best we can, because the other thing we did not want to do was to have to lay off any drivers. So we wanted to maintain our full driver count of 34, not have to lay anybody off, still paying them their 40-hour a week, but spread the work out so that it was shared and balanced and even. So then we started operating on demand. It just made perfect sense. We reached out to the employers in the area, gave them a heads up 3 days ahead of time that we were going to switch over to the on demand. And we also made sure we had 4 different ways for people to book their ride. We set up the email through transit that anybody could email their ride requests in. We set up the customer service phone line that we maintained, so they could phone their rides in through the day, weekdays, Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30. We had the computer portal that we've always had from day one that they could book through. And then we also had the app for Android and Apple-based phones that people could book through. So we sent that information out. We did up the press releases. We hit our social media accounts and let everybody know what was happening, that this is the way we were going to go. And also to encourage that we were there to provide essential trips only. We didn't want people coming, just riding the bus for entertainment purposes or to get out for any social events. We were there for employers and employees and people that needed groceries and appointments, that type of thing. And then we we launched, and we were quite surprised again at the number of people that we had that took full advantage of it. It's been well received. Our ridership has maintained steady between that 200 to 250 a day, but I noticed this week we're starting to creep up.
Yeah, the numbers went up quite a bit. I think today is your highest number yet, and it's probably going to keep going up.
Yeah, and what we have to do with that now is we have to keep an eye on what we have for service, because what's happening is a number of our employees that are riding the bus to the industrial park are telling their friends about, hey, you know what, this is working out excellent, and it's doing really well. Then I see that our increased ridership is pretty much all to the industrial park. So with the Pantonium product, we get regular reports that we can go in and check. We can see time of day. We can see all the information that we need at our fingertips to decide how to redistribute the service. And we've done that a couple of times already. Just we can slide shifts ahead or back and make sure that we cover those peaks and valleys as best we can. And another thing that we have that we really like with the Pantonium product is we can control the number of people on board. Through the booking, we can state the number of riders that can access each vehicle. We're not pulling up to a bus stop and saying, "Oh, we can only carry 10. Sorry, you'll have to wait for the next bus," or to call somebody in. Through the app, we set the cap at 8 mobility, 8 ambulatory, 1 mobility, plus a driver, for a total of 10 on board. And then the system will start automatically scheduling those bookings to another bus. So that takes that difficulty off our hands. It's all done automatically. And it also allows us to control which buses are in and out of service, so that we can maintain our sanitizing and track which buses have to come in and which buses are good to go. And
I also noticed that in response to the spikes in demand, like in that first week, I think it was on the March 27th when we first had that launch, you started with 3 vehicles. So, and that's down from when you had something like 14 vehicles covering a whole city, down to 3. But I think what we realized very quickly was that those 3 vehicles weren't enough in the face of the demand. So the very next day, I think you already had scheduled another vehicle to cover, and then the lateness and cancellations goes down pretty much as soon as you can flip that new vehicle onto the service. So that flexibility, that help respond to this kind of changing circumstance, compared to a fixed route, which I think, as everybody knows, is much more static. And if you change a fixed route even a little bit by adding or taking away a vehicle, suddenly the service changes quite a bit. Is that?
Absolutely. With the on-demand, we have that flexibility to the customer service side of it. They see the improvement, but they don't know how many buses or how the service has changed to affect that. They just see the fact that their ability to book a ride is there, and they're on time, and they get to where they want to go in a reasonable amount of time. Yeah. And we did in our first week after launching the daytime on demand. The response from our riders up to the industrial park was substantial, because it was convenient. And it certainly didn't hurt that we're still not accepting cash fares or fares at all.
Yeah, free ride is
so that nice. spread pretty quickly. So our ridership peaked actually right after we launched the on demand. It rose up a little bit. So we adjusted, and we could do that on the fly, almost instantaneously. All you have to do is put another bus into service and put them into the system. So we've actually increased our daytime operations now. We have a total of 5 buses in our AM peak, 6 in our PM peak, and then through our quiet times, it reduces down to 3. And then late night service now is really quiet, so we're down to just a couple of buses to cover the late night. Now, traditionally, under our regular service, we were running 27 buses a day total, with 13 at the peak. And now we're down to 11 buses a day with 6 at the peak, which is a 58% decrease in the number of vehicles that we're using on a daily basis, and still covering the same service hours from 5 a.m. until midnight. and not having any unaccommodated trips. We're still accommodating every request that comes onto the system. We do actually have midday and early evening time where we actually have buses that are looking for work. They're sitting, but we're not going to take them into service because now that we're seeing this increase in ridership again, they'll be picking up shortly. Now, with the decrease in the number of buses that we're putting on the road in a day, our numbers of kilometers per day are dropping as well. We were traveling roughly 4,000 kilometers on a weekday, and we've dropped that down now to just over 1,500 kilometers in a weekday with the number of buses that we have out there. Over the period of a week, we have a 60% decrease in the number of kilometers that we're covering in a week as well. And still, that 5 a.m. till midnight, we're still covering the entire city, every bus stop with that decrease. And then again, our total operating hours in a day. Unfortunately, it doesn't affect our budget because we're still paying our drivers their full 40 hours as a matter of principle on the city's side of things. But we do have a 64.8% reduction in the hours per day that we're putting out in service, but still covering that full term of the day, which has helped a little bit. Which in turn, because we have fewer vehicles, we're driving fewer kilometers. The one thing that we can count on being reduced is the amount of fuel that we're using as well, and that's down. Our usage of fuel is down about 60% with the introduction of the on-demand service as well. So we are losing revenue through the fare box because we're not collecting fares. We're still paying our drivers their wage, but some of our expenses are going away in that our fuel usage is decreasing. And we're also taking advantage of this time with the number of buses that we have that we don't have to run in service to get some maintenance done too. So it's working out well.
So I guess you were in the enviable position of, every other transit agency in North America and the world pretty much has had the same crisis of plummeting ridership, having to manage social distancing. Do you think that having an on-demand tool in your toolbox as a transit agency is necessary, just in the back pocket for every agency to have something like this? So when the next catastrophe happens, you're ready to switch off. So is on-demand something that maybe you don't need it in the daytime when everything's running normally, but do you think Belleville was in a better position because you were running that pilot project at nighttime and were able to switch very quickly over?
Absolutely. Well, with having that on demand there ready and ready to go, it made that entire transition from regular full operating service to on demand, and to help us better set up for social distancing and to be prepared for our customers. Rather than having to do additional education to the passengers about number of people on the bus and how do we have something else prepared in case there's more passengers than our social distancing will allow with the 10 on board. Do we have buses sitting ready to go? How does that work? With the on-demand, that made it all very, very easy because you set the number of passengers that the system can book on a bus. You see your daily bookings. You know when you're going to get your peaks and valleys. So it set up the social distancing much easier for us. The ability to schedule a bus and schedule a time, again, is done on the fly. It's done easily. The transition in reality, once we decided that on-demand was the way to go, once we got the information out to the public and prepared our drivers, in reality, now that we know the drivers are aware and we know how quickly we can notify the public, this can be done in literally a couple of hours. We can go from full regular service to on demand and be functioning well without any issues. What we have looked at now that we've had the opportunity to operate on demand on a full day is how easy the transition could be when we go back to regular service for our off-peak hours. we can run our regular fixed route service through our peaks when we know that we have or will have passengers going to the college or going to work. We know when those key times are now. We can start looking at running earlier morning service on demand until ridership builds up to the point where we have to go to our fixed routing, go to the fixed route for that set time of day. And then during our peaks and after peaks, pre-peak and post-peak, we can go back to on demand and cover the same amount of area with fewer vehicles and still be able to meet our goals and our requirements. So that's something we're taking a very close look at. When we first start to ramp back up, initially it'll just be back to our regular daytime service. But when we're doing our service review that we're kind of working on now, that's absolutely going to be a part of it. How we can bring on demand into a more regular part of our service.
And I know you touched on this briefly, and I'm just going to share some data that we've pulled from the system, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the operations now that you have about a month of running this under your belt. I know, so this is your response slide essentially. Now you have 5 or 6 vehicles covering the whole city at your peaks, and one thing that we've noticed is the convenience factor for the riders. And I know, it's a free trip, as you said, but also it's a direct trip now. And I think that's what we want to focus on when it comes to on-demand transit, and how it makes the commute much more convenient sometimes. And I don't want to slag your fixed route network. And I think the fixed route network of Belleville performs very well compared to a lot of cities. I think you can get around pretty much anywhere in the town. But what we've been able to do is compare a commute in the daytime, which we never had the data for a fixed route service versus the on-demand service. And so we've pulled a few trips here and there in the system. So in this case, it's from Victoria to Walmart, which is, I know Walmart is the hot destination in Belleville. It's #1 stop. and in this case, there were a few different ways you could access the trip via the fixed route network, but all of them required a transfer essentially. And they took about between 30 and 40 minutes to take. And what we've seen in the on-demand service trips, you have maybe a 20-minute wait plus a 20-minute ride time plus an average of 10-minute wait and no transfer. So these types of trips, and I don't know if you've heard from the riders, but are these types of, or is this change in the service level and the convenience of that, is that being noticed by the riders? Have you heard any comments on that, or are you just seeing them vote with their feet by increasing the use of the service?
We are hearing that from a lot of our workers in the industrial park, not so much our Walmart. It's going down a little bit now because we're only doing the essential trips. But our workers that are coming from all over Belleville to get to that Northeast Industrial Park, we're experiencing exactly the same thing. Depending on where they lived in the city, it was taking them 38, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour to get to work. But now with the convenience of the on-demand, they're booking their ride at 5 a.m. or 5:15. And they're at work within 20, 30 minutes at the most. And I think that's another reason we're starting to see that boost in ridership. Again, through on demand, is because it's convenient. We can get you from anywhere in the city to anywhere in the city with no transfers in nearly in almost 50 to 60% or 40%, between 40 and 50% quicker than we could have with the fixed route service. And another benefit to the on-demand is now that we're running essential trips only, is we can see where the trips are going from and going to. So we have the ability, because everybody registers with an email address, if we start to see somebody that looks like maybe it's not an essential trip, we can send an email and say, just a quick reminder that we're operating for essential only, and appreciate it if this isn't an essential trip, if you could cancel it or change your ride mode, and that's helped us there a lot as well.
Interesting. I didn't. Yeah, that is a interesting use case. And here's another example. And here's an example where the fixed route beat out the average time. So, and that's the Concentrics. And I know they're a great partner of yours. And even, I've had employees from Concentric in their other offices emailing us and ask for the service in Oshawa, for example, because they like it so much in Belleville. Now, I think it's. I have some lessons that we as a team have learned at Belleville or from the Belleville experience in the last month, and I'm sure you've already shared a lot of it. But I think we can just run through this really fast. And the coverage and the efficiency of the coverage when demand is low, it's clearly been proved. And I think if you're running an empty fixed bus because there's no demands, but you have to run the empty fixed bus, the best thing you could do is just park that bus. And I think that's what Belleville has been doing. And if there is no demand, and you still want to keep that bus around because you don't want to leave anybody stranded, why not just park the bus somewhere strategic and wait for the trips to come to it? And, you save on gas. And I think that's, as you said, has been proven as something. And then the flexibility of supply of vehicles, I think is another key thing. So yeah, if you get a lot of trips and higher demand and you start to see decline in service, if you're getting late or long wait times, you can immediately add a bus to fix that. And I think this is something that we're still working on, is adding more automation to the entire process. So, worst case scenario, if this social distancing practices have to continue for 6 months, I mean, fingers crossed that it doesn't, transit agencies might have to have even more stringent controls on interacting with drivers. So for instance, if somebody boards a bus now in Belleville, they can still ask the driver to, or if you were to collect fares once again, can you automate that process so people don't even have to hand a physical card to a driver? So I think there's still some things that we can do to improve the automation of the process to completely eliminate any human interaction. And then, as we were talking about, the commute time reduction is a big potential. Obviously, when there's very little demand, you can get away with having a better service. So I think if we tried this in normal circumstances, you would need a lot of vehicles to provide the same level of service for your normal runs. But in times like this, or at night times, I think the on-demand can edge out the fixed routes in terms of serving commuters. Is there any other lessons that you've learned from running it for about a month now in terms of how to manage the COVID crisis and also just on-demand in general?
It became, we've always believed that there was going to be some benefits to the on-demand at certain times of day, and like you said, at off-peak or at lower ridership times. But this has been an excellent opportunity for us to actually put it into practice and see it for sure. Now we have the numbers. Now we can put things together and say, these are the benefits, this is the savings, this is how we can improve our service for our customers during the off-peak times. We still have, and we'll always have, the demand for certain core routes that have to be fixed because we know the volume back and forth to our college in particular. A north-south route to our Walmart, of course, is our second number 2 destination. And then some of our locations along the way, like Concentrics, the one route that was quicker on fixed rather than on demand is because it's on the college route. So it's going to see that increased level of service, but a higher ride volume as well. But other areas, once we start to operate north of our 401 into our rural area, in some of our lesser densely populated locations right in town, we can serve those less expensively and better with an on-demand service than we ever could with a fixed route. And we're also taking a look at right now our specialized services, our door-to-door service for mobility. Their ridership is down 90+% as well.
Oh, yeah. Really?
we have an opportunity. We could tie all of this together. We could do door-to-door service with on-demand utilizing conventional transit, or vice versa. We have that flexibility on the fly to combine the services and cover the biggest number of passengers using the least number of vehicles as we have.
Yeah, and paratransit. I know that's the. I think that's another interesting thing about this project is when most people consider demand response or on-demand services, they think of paratransit. And what we've seen here, and this might be a unique project in that it's conventional transit through and through. It's large buses, it's the commuting, it's daytime hours, peak hours, but it's on demand. So it's a very different thing than the traditional. Yeah, you have your paratransit, specialized transit service, which is door to door and only by request. But this is, your commuters. So that is an interesting. And then, of course, the opportunity of merging those two together. I think that's the holy grail of making transit sustainable, at least fiscally in your operations. Is paratransit is a millstone around every transit's budget. So if any kind of way to minimize those costs and still keep the service at the level it needs to be, that would be a great opportunity. And I think now let's talk about the future of Belleville Transit. I know you guys just got some big funds for new buses. It's an interesting time to get new equipment, but where do you see transit in general going in the next 6 to 12 months? Assuming this crisis is going to linger around, but also it will be mitigated or the intensity will be reduced. Your demand is going to go up, but you're still going to have social distancing principles. So what are transits going to do in this kind of this transition phase, so to speak?
I wish I had a crystal ball.
Yeah.
We, as everyone is, we're hoping that this corrects itself soon and we can come back to our some semblance of normal that we're all used to. But we are prepared if this continues. We're starting to look at how it's going to roll out. I think there's been a substantial awakening in the transit industry that the exchange of cash fares and the exchange of tickets is probably not a good idea, and we're going to see a concern from our customers to go back to that. How do we give them the confidence that we can collect fares without that contamination or risk? And just to get people back on board the bus, I think there's going to be some concern about safety there. And I don't think we're going to randomly choose a day and say, okay, we're good to go. Let's start on such and such a day and be fully operational. I think it's going to take some time to ramp up. And I think we need to take a look at how we deliver our services and how the customer wants us to deliver our services moving forward. I don't think normal is going to be as normal as we've had in the past. I think the new normal is going to be regular social distancing, changes in how we communicate directly with our customers on board the bus, how we board, and with this technology of on demand, like we've said before, this already puts us in a good spot to continue that, but be able to grow our service back up, but still maintain some of those expectations of social distancing and technology and how we book and how we board passengers. With the new equipment that we just purchased, 4 new buses, these are the first brand new pieces of equipment that we purchased in 10 years. So we've ordered them set up with the technology that we think will continue us down that path of the new normal, that the technology of on demand will work well with, and we'll be able to continue to serve the customers in the manner they hope to see. And that's the real thing with on demand is it's a substantial change in how you look at the service, because we're not telling people how to use the service or how to get to where they're going. They get to tell us. We decide how many pieces of equipment and how many hours we're out there for, but the customer decides how it gets used.
Yeah. And how do you think this is, for all the, in terms of what the government can do and also what the private sector can do, how can transit be helped? Because I know recovering from this is going to be slow. Your budget has been, you guys have probably thought of your budget last year, and suddenly you have to throw all that away. What can be done to help transit? Is now the time to lobby for more funding, or is now the time to, some people might be saying scrap it all and replace it with taxis. So how do we fight those people, or the ones who want to just replace it all with Uber in the end?
Uber and taxis, they will not be able to supply sufficient demand or to meet the demand of ridership. And in order to do that, the number of cars on the streets would just be astronomical. Public transit's always going to be required. There's always going to be the demand for it. There's no other service that's there that can move the number of people that transit moves in a day, the way we do it. And most systems, or all systems, do it as efficiently as they possibly can. This isn't. It's not something that we set out to lose as much money as we can on. We set out to move as many people as we can, as efficiently as we can. So I don't know that, our budget, because we have zero revenue generation right now, and we still have the expenses to operate the service, well, we could absolutely benefit from some sort of government subsidy to cover this current loss. But I think more importantly, moving forward, it'd be an ideal time for federal and provincial governments to look at how they can set up a regular distribution of funds to operate public transit, so that if this ever does happen again, we have the reliance of some income to continue operations without reaching into the hole too deep as we are right now.
Yeah. Okay. And I think just in terms of there was 25 questions, and I think we have about 20 minutes. So I think we can try to get through some of these. So I'm going to just pull up the questions now, and we'll go through them. I'll pick the ones that are liked the most. So the first one is from Jason Yanni. Do you have thresholds in place for when fixed routes would make more sense than on demand?
We do.
Yep. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're always, that's the one thing that we're always looking at, is at what point does the tip occur when fixed routing meets or is better than the on demand, and that for us is when it's a matter of number of buses. If we get to the point where we have to use 7 on demand buses to cover the area and cover the demand, when if we situated fixed routing and could cover that with fewer vehicles, that's the switch. So the threshold for us is number of vehicles as opposed to number of passengers.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't even know that. Good to know. And the next one is from Jeremy DaCosta. Hi, Jeremy. So he's asking, hi, Paul, does the app track the number of unfilled rides? So in other words, do you have any points where the demand exceeds bus supply and trips are not able to be completed?
It does. It doesn't. We see it from the operational side. We'll get, it's been a very long time since we've hit that.
Yeah,
because we do fluctuate the service in order to meet the demand. But the passenger will get, and we get on our system, it's recorded as an unaccommodated trip. But what Pantonium product is excellent at doing is it is constantly trying to improve the efficiency of the service. So it may flash as unaccommodated now, but depending on if somebody's canceling when that trip comes in, it'll get accommodated very, very quickly. And it gets shuttled in. But it does track if there's anything that's unaccommodated, but we haven't seen that in our daytime operation of on demand at all. and we haven't seen it with our nighttime on demand in since July of last year or this year.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I got an interesting stat from our support team on how basically how it does that. Exactly what Paul described is in Belleville's case, in an average day, I think it's running about 2.6 million iterations of plans. So every time a new trip is added, it's running thousands and thousands of iterations in order to fit that trip in. So even if it can't immediately be accommodated, maybe there's a cancellation, or maybe a bus gets rerouted, or maybe the system finds that needle in a haystack in the course of the iterations to get that trip filled. And that's how we can keep the accommodations so high. So the next question from Wilhelm. Do you think there's any part of this, the technology that is being used for your on-demand service that could be implemented and useful for your fixed service when it returns? And I think you covered this a little bit in talking about filling in the gaps, filling in in those low density areas. I think the Ward 2 example, so that northern rural area, and also the off-peak. Is there anything else that this would be useful for, or maybe for planning or any of that?
Definitely for planning. Anytime we take a look at how we're looking at our service or doing anything, we always look at how on-demand will fit in. And I think the biggest part of on-demand that we're going to see the use of the technology for is another thing I mentioned, is the combination of conventional and specialized or paratransit. That inclusion of everybody on one bus being able to book the same way on demand. You don't have to do it ahead of time. That's going to be the big technology emerge with on demand that I see coming up.
Okay, and next question from Luke. Richard, how did the use of on-demand affect your scheduling protocols, and what about the union? Any challenges? And I know that I get that question all the time. What do the unions think of this? And I think you have a great relationship with your union, so it may not be applicable to all transit agencies, which may have more trouble with this.
Yeah, we do. We have an excellent working relationship with our union, and we always make sure to maintain that as best we can. So before we made the switch to on-demand full-time days, we sat down with the union and asked for their opinion and input on it, as well as how we were going to do it. So what we ended up doing is, because we weren't going to lay anybody off, everybody was going to maintain their regular pay. We sat down and took all of the fixed routing and the bid that we had currently, and kind of set it aside and just put everybody on spare board, and split up all the duties. Our sanitizing is done by our drivers as well as the driving. So everybody just kind of went to spare board. They pick by seniority and choose their work, and away they go. And that helped a lot. That when we very first launched on demand, the union was a little bit worried, because this is a completely different aspect in how we do things. And they were afraid that it was going to be an efficiency project where we started to reduce service because we had on demand. When we sat down and started to work with them and explain to them what we're looking to do is actually grow the service with on demand, not reduce it. So that when we went down the street, right now our fixed route was down the street, turns right, picks up one person, and then goes 7 or 8, 9, 10 stops and doesn't get anybody. With the on demand, every single stop they go to will have somebody there. So it's going to increase our reliance on drivers and the ability to run a service. So they are very supportive of it now. That they see that it's actually an increase in business, and it somewhat protects them in the industry that we do.
Okay, yeah. And the next question from Winnie. How are bus drivers responding to the switch to on-demand service? Does it require additional training to those who used to operate fixed routes? So I think in your case, you trained a lot of people up, and again, that was why you're fortunate that you had it in the first place. But
it does require some training. It's all operated from the driver's side. It's operated through a tablet, an Android-based LTE tablet, and it only requires 2 or 3 taps on a tablet at every pickup. It's very easy to use. It's fairly intuitive for the drivers to understand and know what's going on, so that the training time in it was very quick. It's about an hour per driver, and they've got it. It's pretty easy to use.
Okay. And question from Caroline. Hi, Caroline. How does Belleville promote this service to increase passenger usage tenfold? So I've been thinking about this too, because how do you imagine you're releasing a new service, and in a pandemic, do you hand out pamphlets to people on the bus? It's a tricky thing marketing in this day and age.
It was tricky to market, but we've got again an excellent communications program set up with Belleville. So we have the ability to push it out through all our social medias. We got information out to all of our regular media, radio, print in the city as well. But the benefit to the Pantonium product, because we already had it, is everyone registers with an email address. So we have all of our regular users' emails that we could also push out emails to and say, just be advised, we're switching to on demand for all of our service, and this is how to use it. And then by setting up the additional email option for booking a ride, and to set up our own call center, customer service call center Monday to Friday to book rides by phone, that helped a lot as well. And we still do that. We regularly, every couple of days, we'll push out some more. We're still operating on demand media information, and just to keep everybody going. And we also, because we knew we only wanted to operate essential services, our economic development staff reached out to the industrial park employers that we knew were still going to be operating, and provided them bulletins to post in the workplace.
Okay. This question from Phil for you, Paul. Pantonium sounds like a big win for riders. Thanks, Phil. How was the transition for internal operations? And I think maybe you covered this in the other questions, but did you receive any pushback from anybody in the organization internally to buy into the changes so quickly? Because I know it was a very rapid change.
We did move pretty quickly. The benefit to Pantonium is that it's predominantly completely autonomous. It does, once our supervisor puts in the number of buses for the day and the drivers for the day, the system operates entirely on its own, which was the benefit to us when we first launched our pilot, because our service doesn't have dispatchers, and we didn't have supervisors on in the evening when the service was run. So it was, the best part of it for us was that we didn't need people other than the drivers and the customers. So it was a pretty easy transition. Once the drivers got on to the fact that there was no more fixed routing, and they didn't know where they were going from day to day until they got used to that. Then it was a little bit okay, because it wasn't as redundant, and they saw the benefits. They saw the passengers on board the buses, rather than driving around empty all night. They were driving around busy. They were full.
Okay. Let's see, from Will Towns, this one just got upvoted the most. Before the pandemic, were you moving 300 to 400 passengers per night on the late night service with 2 buses, or did you have to scale vehicle numbers up to eventually meet this demand?
We had to scale up. When the most recent number of vehicles that we had on the road for our late night was 5. Back in July, we had to make the decision. We were seeing, that's when we started to see our unaccommodated trips show up on our late night service. And we were getting some complaints from customers that the rides were taking too long. So in July, we made the decision to go slightly less efficient, but better on the customer service side, and increase the number of vehicles on the road, which opened up additional spots for ridership. It took some of the pressure off of our drivers. They could, they didn't have that the push to constantly be on as busy as they were, and the customers were seeing easier book trips and shorter trips. So it was worth the choice. Okay.
And this one from Brian Harvey. Hey, Brian, hope things are all well with you. How early are riders required to book their trip? That's an easy one, I think.
Yeah, they can book their rides in advance in multiple trips. So if you are an employee working in the industrial park and you have your schedule for the next 2 weeks, you can implement it for the next 2 weeks or beyond. If you are at work and you have a trip booked or something happens, you need to go home, we have the ASAP option as well, where you just go into the app, you book your pickup, your pickup point, your drop off point, and request the bus ASAP, and it'll schedule it to you as quickly as it can. And right now we're looking at about a 10 to 12 minute wait for the ASAP trips.
Okay. And from Tristan, do you have strategies to nudge people on how to enter the bus and where to sit? So I've seen plenty of examples in Toronto doing this, but I wonder what Belleville's doing.
Yeah, we just don't open the front doors. We only open the rear doors when we pull up to the stop. The front doors have a sign that states rear door boarding only. But if we pull up and somebody's there with a mobility device and need the ramp, then we bring them in through the front door. On board the bus, we have every other seat is taped off and signed so that they can't use it.
Okay. And one from Brian. Can the system integrate on demand with fixed route as to create timely transfers between the two? And that's something we haven't actually tried in Belleville yet.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to actually look at when we launch in Ward 2. We are going to tie in our Ward 2 on demand service with our daytime fixed routing in down in south of the 401 in the city proper. So we believe it will. There's no reason to believe it won't. From what we've looked at and what we've tested, we think it's going to work really well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we have all you need as a transit agency to do that integration with us for the fixed routes and the on-demand is GTFS data. So if the system will pull in the GTFS data of the fixed route service, and then the system will give that to the riders and show, okay, this is when the buses will arrive at that bus stop, and you can coordinate, and you just pick that time and it'll coordinate an on-demand drop-off or pickup at that time when the fixed route is going to be arriving. So next question from Tristan. Normally, less than 20% of the nodes serve over 80% of the passengers. So I get that nodes would be stops, I suspect. And did you incorporate a strategy based on this, or did you follow a more agile strategy? I think that's like the system does that. It does. On demand is agile. That's the point. So. I think Walmart and your employment area, the industrial area, probably gets 80% of the trips now, probably more.
More currently. Yeah. When we first launched, and it still is, we just have every bus stop in the city of Belleville is able to book a trip to, and the Pantonium product itself does that scheduling. So the service. The nodes are operated the same as they would be through the fixed route service. We don't use anything other than what's booked. So they're all available, but if we don't need them, we don't use them. The service looks after that itself.
Okay. And next one from William. What is something you wish you had known or learned before adopting this on-demand strategy, either for the pilot or for the current pandemic response?
I wish we had known about it and had it sooner.
Yeah, nice.
It's the technology that we've always been looking for. Anybody that's ever run dial-a-bus in the past or anything similar to that, and we always said, this would be great if we could make it more efficient, or if something would schedule it better, and that's what this does. I haven't seen a single opportunity in our service where it doesn't have a possibility of fitting in and working. For me, it's the only wish I had is that it's just always been here. I'm just glad we have it now.
Yeah, and I think that's a great answer, Paul. One thing we did learn is never underestimate the demand, because I think both in the initial pilot. We didn't expect that kind of demand, and I think we were surprised by that.
I was horribly surprised by that because I was being a transit person. Things don't happen quickly. When you start a new service with transit, you anticipate that it's going to build slowly over time. You expect that when it launches, it's going to take a while for passengers to catch on to it. become accustomed to it, get used to it, and start to trust it, and then start to grow. Literally from the first night of service with On Demand, the passengers started showing up, and it grew in days to where I thought it would take years. It's just been fantastic.
So a question for Michael. Hi, Michael. Did Paul say 300 to 400 passengers per night with 3 question marks?
I did. Yeah, we went from 35 to 40 to 300, between 300 and 400 are our busiest nights. Yeah. And it took no time at all. The customer response to the On Demand, and we started when we first started talking with Pantonium, we started putting out about a news release about every 6 months that we were looking at the system and we were moving forward with the system and we were anticipating its release. And then when we did release it, we didn't do as much marketing as I would have liked to have done. And it turns out we didn't need to, because the public was more than ready for it. They were anticipating it, and they reacted and responded immediately to it.
Yeah. Another question from Tristan. Did you enter any edge cases that increased risk? So that's could mean, I guess, edge cases, things that didn't, I guess normally a fixed route service is pretty, predictable, right? An on-demand service, I suppose the buses are going everywhere. Anything could happen, or a lot more could happen. Have you had anything like that?
We really didn't. We knew that with On Demand, we could be more agile. We could change things more or less on the fly. So we just monitored it and were ready for it. We didn't really test anything. We just went live and to see what would happen, and everything's been pleasantly surprising so far. Yeah.
Question from Anonymous. Is the service still fare free? If yes, is there a transition plan to return to fares? And I think you kind of touched on that, but maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah, currently we are still fare free in Belleville, and we are waiting for the provincial emergency measures to be removed, and then we'll start to look at how we ramp back up. We are prepared to launch a mobile pay service right now, where you can pay through your phone. So that will be incorporated when we ramp back up to avoid that transfer of tickets or cash. But should be the returning to cash fares for us will be as easy as it was to turn it off. We'll just start to advertise that effective such and such a day. We'll be again collecting fares through the service. But we'll also run that cushion of time, probably 3 or 4 days till everybody gets back in the swing of things and has an opportunity to load up all their fare media or to purchase fare media and get back into the routine. And
we've hit 1 o'clock, so I think we still have a few questions. There is a few questions I just want to hit just on the administrative side. Somebody asked if we'll be sharing this after. So yeah, we'll share a recording and also the deck of the webinar after. So if you signed up and attended, you'll get a recording. Other than that, I think if anybody is interested in learning more about this, feel free to reach out. We'll be following up with the outcome of the webinar. Paul, is there anything you want to end on? I'm sorry, everybody who asked the question. We just ran out of time. Is there any last thoughts or anything you want to plug yourself, Paul, while we have you here?
No, actually, to everybody out there that's just running a transit operation right now, I wish you all the best of luck, and I look forward to getting things back into our normal. And reach out if you have any more questions, or if there's anything we didn't address here and it's piqued your interest. Send me an email or give me a call, and I'll do what I can to help you out for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul, so much. This was great. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else learned something today. And do please stay safe. And hopefully soon we'll be back to normal. But if hopefully on-demand transit from Pantonium can help now or can help in the future. And with that, I'll leave it. Again, we'll be following up with the recording. And if you do have any questions, feel free to either email myself or Paul, as he said. So anyways, thank you everybody for your time, and have a great rest of your week. Thanks,
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you.
Take care, bye.